This is the video for Module 5's lab from course 10981. So here we're going to look at configuring some storage. As you mentioned, there's no block level storage associated with Virtual Machine Manager. So we're going to use iSCSI as a mechanism to actually attach some storage, classify the storage for provisioning of virtual machines on. The first thing we need to be able to do is configure the host so they would have the possibility to attach the storage. Because we're going to use iSCSI, we need to configure the iSCSI initiator. Now we could of course remote desktop into the individual hosts, start the service and configure it up, but it's much better if we try and do this without that process. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually take a folder that basically just has a couple of commands, and it has a script command which is just going to launch our PowerShell script. And then the PowerShell script is actually just going to launch the service configuration for iSCSI. So it's going to configure the service for automatic and then start the iSCSI initiator service. So we're going to use Virtual Machine Manager effectively to deploy that to the host. Now again, obviously we're going to do this graphically, but this would be something that would be quite easy for you to do using a script, so you could actually administer en masse. So we're just going to import the script file into the Virtual Machine Manager's library. We're just going to tell it where we would like that script file to be placed. So we're just going to select the folder inside the library server. So we're just going to bring that in. This should just take a few seconds, and then the scripts that you just saw will be available to be run against any host that we wish to run those scripts against. So you can now hopefully see we've actually got the custom resource for the enabling iSCSI adapter. So you can see that's actually in the list there quite happily in the central pane. So we'll switch over to the Fabric panel. We'll go to each of our hosts. So we'll go to LUN host 1 first, and we're going to run the script command. So we're going to tell it what we want to execute, any parameters that are needed, and then effectively the script package. So we're going to tell it to run command.exe, effectively open a command prompt. We want it to run quiet, and we want it to run the command enable iSCSI. So we'll actually go off and run that enable iSCSI initiator CMD. Okay. So we'll just point it at the object we just imported into the library, so the system knows which files it needs to copy down onto the machine. And that's really what a lot of things that we would need to consider doing. Obviously, if we needed to specify specific credentials, then we can do that. And as we're making a change to services, then we really should be doing that. So hopefully we can just go and hit the run. That will actually deliver the command to the remote machine, deliver all the supporting script information, and then run the command for us. So that's enabled the iSCSI initiator. Obviously the iSCSI initiator hasn't got connectivity to any storage yet. We've not got that far. We've actually just turned the service on. So because we've just run it against the machine we're physically sitting on, if we go into services and just actually drop down, we should see the Microsoft iSCSI initiator is now configured for automatic and is now in a running state. So we need to do the same against host 2. So we just need to run the script exactly the same way. So we can just run the same command. So we'll just go and run a cmd.exe, the same parameter set. Again, we'll pick up the same set of package file and the same set of credentials. So that will go and do exactly the same against host 2 for us. So we're actually going to switch over to LUN DC1, and even though it's our domain controller, we're also going to use this machine as our iSCSI block level storage. So just to sort of show you where we are from a configuration point at the moment, we'll just go into the iSCSI configuration. So having signed into LUN DC1, we'll open up Server Manager, and we will actually go and have a look at the iSCSI configuration, which can be viewed inside the File and Services section. So we'll just load that up, and we'll be able to go in and have a look at the configuration shortly. So the file and storage services are there. We'll select iSCSI, and we can look at the current iSCSI configuration. So the first thing we have is the disks that exist. So we can see there's just one disk at the moment. and it has some configuration. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to the PowerShell. Now obviously again we could have done this graphically, but we're actually going to configure the iSCSI configuration to actually create us a new iSCSI disk. So just using the new iSCSI virtual disk command, we're just going to create a 150 gigabyte VHDX file for our SAN. So we're just going to iSCSI-lun-1.vhdx. So then we'll put the size in bytes and put 150 GB, and that will go and create us our 150 gigabyte file. We can minimize that. If we refresh the iSCSI file and storage services, we should see that we now have our new disk called iSCSI-lun-1, and again we can see that it's not connected. Nothing's actually talking to it at this precise moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and make some changes in VMM to start with, so we can bring that iSCSI SAN under administration. So we can actually administer a range of storage systems, but we're going to focus on SMIS, and because it's the Microsoft iSCSI SAN, we need to use WMI. So we put in the name or IP address of the server and credentials that allow us to log into the storage. So this obviously our domain credentials would work perfectly well. If this was a dedicated SAN device, a SAN appliance, then obviously you'd be using some other form of credentials. So we've read some configuration from the machine. We can now actually decide which physical disks we'd like to bring under administration. So we're going to bring drive E under administration. We have to classify that disk, so we're just going to actually create a classification we're going to call iSCSI and set that against it, and that will then actually see that there are two sets of storage on that disk, but we'll see that shortly. So you can see that we've actually configured the storage array. That task or that job is completed successfully. So if we go back to the fabric, what we can actually see is we've got our iSCSI classification, we've got our iSCSI drive E, and we've got the two virtual disks. So the two virtual disks are the two disks that we can see here. So we can see that configuration has been brought across. We can now start to administer and manage that configuration. So back into Virtual Machine Manager, if we actually look at the properties of one of the virtual disks, here we can actually see the object and the disk name as far as that disk is concerned, and obviously we can see that's the disk that's labelled as the data disk because of its 126 gigabyte size, whereas the 150 gigabyte one was labelled as the next one down. So what we're going to do is we're actually just going to use the get System Center Storage Logical Unit, and we're going to look specifically for some storage to be returned. So we're going to say where the total capacity, okay, is equal to 150 gigabytes. So hopefully what that will do is it will just send back that one bit of storage that is 150 gigabytes in size. What we're then going to do is we're then going to actually change the name of that bit of storage, so it's a bit easier to administer. So we're actually going to change the name, and so we're going to set the name and hopefully make it something far more readable and easier to administer the system. So iSCSI-lun-1, so it matches the name actually in the storage. So that's now gone and hopefully applied that setting for us, so we can see the name is now changed. If we go back into Virtual Machine Manager, we can see that change has been reflected immediately. You can see the name box is active, so we could have done it again from the command line, from the Virtual Machine Manager. We didn't actually have to go and do it via a command line utility if we didn't want to. So we're going to switch across to the Fabric section and look at the cluster, and go to the properties of the cluster and start to look at the storage configuration of the cluster. So we can see there's no available storage, there's no file share storage, there's no shared volumes. So we can see there's no storage actually attached to the cluster that the Virtual Machine Manager is aware of. And if we was to go into the virtual machines, again if we look at the hardware, there isn't any additional the additional storage. We've just got the sort of storage that the machines have sort of had all the time, basically, including my USB storage. So you might not have seen Drive E when you was working with your systems, because there wouldn't have been any USB storage plugged in necessarily. So we'll sort of confirm there's no SAN storage connected to our hosts or our cluster. So if we come down to the storage section, you can see again we're unaware that there's any sort of iSCSI array, even though we've got the initiator running, because we've not told the initiator what to go and connect to. So it's unaware that that storage that we've been provisioning exists at this moment in time. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the add iSCSI array, so we can actually read that iSCSI. Now you might find that add iSCSI array is not valid in certain circumstances. That would normally be either the initiator is not running or the host has not, configuration has not been refreshed. So we're just going to press connect, and then that should actually allow us to start to see the storage that exists on that array. So we just need to actually make that configuration change on both the hosts. So we're going to need to go and add the storage array to both the hosts. Okay, so they now have the ability to communicate with those hosts, but again you still obviously could have hosts which talk to different LUNs in the same storage array, so we still need to make sure that we allocate the correct LUNs to the correct hosts. So we're going to use the allocate capacity tool for action. We're obviously going to select the Contoso host group, and we're actually going to select that storage which is under the management of VMM and allocate that storage. So basically we're saying we're going to take Drive E, so that's the storage pool, so the sort of physical set of disks that are going to be allocated, and then the next step would be to allocate the logical unit, so that would then be the VHDX file in our case to that storage environment. So let's just go back into the iSCSI tool on DC1 and see if that's made any change. So actually you can still see there's no change, there's no configuration change that's occurred at this moment. So even though we've effectively connected the physical disks to the Contoso host group, that's not actually made any disk configuration changes at all. So if we go into the host group and hit properties and come down to the storage section, you can see that disk there. So we could have added that disk through this interface. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to pick up that logical disk, that logical unit, and say actually that logical unit can now be consumed. So we've been taking the sort of blank disks, the physical disks, and now taking that reserved area of storage. So if we go back into the iSCSI configuration software, again you can still see nothing's actually happened, because even though we've now reserved the storage for this part of the system, the storage still hasn't been connected to and started to be used. So the last step of the chain is to really connect to the storage. So we're going to do this from the cluster, so we're pressing add on the shared volumes. We can see the LUN because we've already presented the LUN, and I'm just going to also tell the system to actually perform a quick format. Notice at the bottom there is a create logical unit, so again there are multiple places we can achieve the same results. We can create logical units for a storage pool we have access to from the Fabric panel. We can also do it directly on the cluster itself. So we've now actually attached the LUN in the interface, so we can now see that's fired a job. So we're going off, we're actually going to be reconfiguring the LUN masking inside the iSCSI SAN, and we're going to format the volume. So this will take a few seconds to actually complete, and we then should be able to go over to the iSCSI SAN, so in our case LUN DC1, and we should see that volume should now be connected to. So hopefully, having completed the job successfully, if we refresh the server manager screen on LUN DC1, you can now see that storage is connected, and you can see there are two entries, and if we just scroll to the right, you'll see in the initiator ID it will actually list LUN host 1 and LUN host 2 as the computers that are connected. So we can clearly see now all of that work from VMM has actually allowed us to take storage that's been provisioned by the storage administrator, provision a LUN on it, actually attach that LUN to our cluster, and make that cluster available. So you can see where the storage is now actually being connected to. You can see because we've allocated it to the cluster, it's gone in as a clustered shared volume. So all of that work has now been done. We can see the path that we actually have for that location. And again, obviously features like classification have obviously been brought across that we defined right at the beginning. Just for the point of view of classification, obviously you can create as many classifications as you want which are appropriate for your business. A lot of organisations do like to use classification models which are descriptive based on value, so precious metals as an example. Obviously one of the key things when you design classification models is to actually understand the audience that's going to consume them. You know, ultimately if these are going to be consumed by non-technical people, then precious metals might not necessarily work, because if you're given the choice between gold and bronze, you're always going to pick gold. So the language you use might vary. So just going into the properties of one of the hosts, you can see the classification for the storage is set to iSCSI. You can change the classification of storage on a particular host if you want to. So we've actually changed that to gold. Now the one thing to be aware of here, because this is a cluster, then that setting will be replicated across all the nodes in the cluster, whereas if it was a standalone host, it would have only affected that standalone host. So just be aware of that. We can actually change the classification for the storage at a node level. So as you can see in the storage panel, it's still classified as iSCSI, but for that cluster we've changed it to being gold storage. So to review, we created an iSCSI target LUN in our iSCSI server. We then connected that SAN system to our virtual machine manager and discovered the storage, and then we went through the process of allocating and classifying the storage to our individual Hyper-V hosts.